what happened in the dusk. Now, with the coming of the dawn, a lasting silence stole across the land. Damn it. Now, with the coming of dawn, and a lasting silence stole across the land into the valley. We had nothing more to fear. The bosun bade us to get some rest whilst he kept watch, and so I got the last of a very substantial little spell of sleep, which made me fit enough for a day's work. Presently, after some hours had passed, the bosun roused us to go with him to the further side of the island to gather fuel. And soon we were back with each alone, so that in little we had fire going right merrily. Now, for breakfast, we had hash, a biscuit, broken biscuit, salt meat, and some fresh fish which the bosun had picked up from the beach at the foothills of the further hill. The whole being greatly liberally flavored with some vinegar, which the bosun said would help keep down any scurvy which might be threatening us. And at the end of the meal he served out to us each a little of the molasses, which he mixed with hot water and drank. The meal being ended, he went to the next tent and taken up a job, the which he had already done in the early morning, for the condition of the lad preyed on somewhat upon him, being his and top roughness, the man of surprising tender heart. He remained much in the previous evening, so that we knew not what to do with him to bring him into better health. One thing we tried, knowing that no food has passed his lips since the previous evening, and that was to get some little quantity of hot water, rum, and molasses down his throat, for it seemed to us he might die from the very lack of food. Though we worked with him for some more than half an hour, we could not seem to get him to come to sufficiently to take anything, and without that we had feared of suffocating him, and so presently we had perforce to leave him within the net tent and go about our business, for there was very much to be done. Yet before we delved into the valley, being determined to make a very thorough exploration of it, perchance there might be any lurking beast or devil thing waiting to rush out to destroy us as we worked. And more, he would search that it might discover the manner of creature that disturbed the night. Now, in the early morning, when we had gone for fuel, we had kept the upper skirt of the valley where the rock of the near hill came down to the spongy ground. But now we struck right down into the middle of the part of the vale, making a way amid the mighty fungi to the pit-like opening that filled the bottom of the valley. Now, though the ground was very soft, there was in much of springness that left no trace of our steps. After we had gone a little way, none, that is, save in the odd place a wet patch followed upon our treading. Then we got ourselves near to the pit. The ground became softer so that our feet sank into it and left very real impressions. And here we found tracks most things so much as the tracks of a mighty slugs amid the mud. To our encampment amid the mud. To our encampment. And here we also discovered many of them fresh, broken, or uprooted. And there was the same mark of the beast upon them all. And now I remember the dull thuds that I heard that night. and made little doubt that the creatures had climbed the great toadstools so that they might spy us out, and it may make the many climbed upon one so that the weight broke the fungi, or uprooted them. At least, so the thought came to me. And so we made the Ink&Abysss search, and after that the bosom set each of us to work. But the first he had all us all, back to the beach to give our hand to turn over the boat. So much that he might have to get the damaged part. Now, having the bottom of the boat full to his view, he made that there was just other damage beside that of a burst plank, for the bottom plank of all had come away from the keel, which seemed to us a very serious matter, and though it did not show when the boat was upon her bulges, yet the bosun assured us that he had no doubts that she could be made seaworthy, though it took a greater while than hitherto he had thought needful. Having concluded an examination of the boat, the bosun set one of the men to bring the bottom boards out of the tent, for he needs something planking for the repair of the damage. Yet, when the boards had been brought, he still needed something which they could not supply. This was the length of a very sound wood of some 3 inches in breadth each way. He intended to bolt against the starboard side of the keel. After he had gotten the planking replaced so far as possible, he had hopes by means of this device he'd be able to nail the bottom plank to this, then cock it with oakum, making the boat almost as sound as ever. Now, hearing him express his need for such a piece of timber, we all adrift to know whence such a thing could be gotten, until there came suddenly to me a memory of the mast and topmast upon the other side of the island, and at once I made mention of that. At that, the bosun nodded, saying that we might get timber out of it, though it would be a work requiring some considerable labor. Having reached the spars, we set the lower rigging was stranded so far as halfway up the shrouds, yet there remained much that was good, and all of it quite free from rot, and of the very finest quality of white hemp, such as we be seen only in the best found vessels. About the time that we had finished clearing the weed, the bosun came over to us, bringing him with him the saw and hatchet. Under his directions, we cut the lanyards in the topmast. And after that, sawed through the topmast just above the cap. Now this was a very tough piece of work, and it employed us a great part of the morning, even though we took turn and turn at the saw. When it was done, we were mightily glad that the bosun had bade one of the men to go over with the weed and make up a fire for dinner, after which he had put a piece of the salt meat to boil. In the meanwhile, the bosun started to cut through the topmast, about 15 feet above the first cast, for that was the length of the batten he required. Yet so wearisome was the work that he had not gotten more than halfway through with it before the man whom the bosun had sent returned to say that dinner was ready. When this was dispatched, and we rested over a little of our pipes, the bosun rose, led us back, for he was determined to get through the topmast before dark. Presently, relieving each other frequently, we completed the second cut, and after that, the bosun set us to saw a block of 12-inch deep for the remaining portion of the topmast. From this, when he had cut it, he proceeded to hew wedges with the hatches, and then notched the end of the 15-foot log, and then into the notch he drove the wedges. And so, towards the evening, Much, maybe by good luck as management. He had divided the log into two halves, and the split running verita. Now perceiving how that it drew near to sundown, he bade the men haste and gather weed and carry across our camps. One he sent along the shore to make search for a shellfish among the weed, yet himself ceased not to work at his divided log, and kept me with him as a helper. Thus, within the next hour, we had the length, maybe some 4 inches in diameter, split off the whole length of one of the halves, and with this he was very well content, though it seemed but a very little result for so much labor. By the time the dusk was upon us, and the men, having made an end of weed carrying, were returned to us and stood about, waiting for the bosun to go to camp. At this moment the man the bosuns had sent to gather shellfish returned, and had a great crab upon his spear, which he had splitted through the belly. This creature could not have been less than a foot across the back, and had a very formidable appearance, yet it proved to be most tasty matter for our supper, when it had been placed for a while in the boiling water. So soon as this man had returned, we made once for the camp, carrying with us the piece of timber which we had hewn from the topmast. By this time it was quite dusk, and very strange amid the great fungi. We struck across the upper edge of the valley to the opposite beach. Particularly, I noticed a handful of mostly moldy odor of these monstrous vegetables was more offensive than I found it in the daytime, though this may be because I used my nose the more, and that I could not use my eyes to any great extent. We had got halfway across the top of the valley, and the gloom was deepening when there stole me the calmness of the evening air, a faint smell, something quite different from that of the surrounding fungi. A moment later I got a great whiff of it, and was near sickened with the abomination of it. But the memory of the foul thing which had come to the side of the boat of the dawn gloom before we discovered the island roused me to terror like the sickness of my stomach. For certainly I had beslimed my face and throat upon the previous night, and left a hideous stench lingering in my nostrils. And with that knowledge, I cried out to the bosun to make haste, for there were demons with us in the valley. And at that some of the men made run, but he bade them in a very grim voice to stay where they were, and to keep well together, else they were attacked and overcome, strangled all among the fungi in the dark. And this being, I doubt, not as much fear as the rounding dark as the bosom. They did, and so we came safely. To the valley, though there seemed to follow us a little lord slithering. Now soon they reached the camp. The bosun ordered 4 fires to be lit, one in each side of the tent, and this we did, lighting them at the up and down. When the bears got going, we put a boiler in the treated crab, as I have already mentioned, and soon fell upon a very hearty supper. But as we ate, each man had his weapon stuck in the sand beside him, for we had knowledge that the valley may have some devilish thing, or maybe many, though the hesitation for the place which we had left job, there was nothing. I stepped into the tent, and in the same instant there came to my throat the faint odor of the horrible stench which had come to me in the valley, and before them, from the thing that came to the side of the boat, and suddenly I knew that Job had fallen prey to one of those foul things, and knowing this, I called the bosun that they had taken the boy, and my eyes caught the smear of slime upon the sand, and I had proof. I was not mistaken. Now, so soon as the bosun knew that was in my mind, though indeed it did not corroborate that Witch had come to his own, he came swiftly out of the tent, bidding the men to stand back, for they had come all about the entrance, being very much discomposed in the which the bosun had discovered. The bosun took from the bundle of reeds which they had cut some time where he had bidden them to gather fuel for several of the thickest, and one of those he found a great mass of dry weed, where the men, divining his attention, did likewise with the others, and so we each had with us the wherewithal of a mighty torch. Soon after we had completed our preparations, we took the man and his weapon, plunging our torches into the fire, and off along the track which had been made by the devil things in the body of poor Job. But now that we had suspicion that harm had come to him, the marks in the sand and the slime were very plain to be seen, so that the wonder was that we had not discovered them earlier. Now the bosun led away, and then finding marks led directly to the valley, he broke into a run, holding his torch well above his head, and that each of us did likewise. For we had great desire to be together, and further than this, I think with truth I may say, we were all fierce to avenge Job, and so that the less than a fear of our hearts would otherwise have been the case. In less than half a minute we had reached the end of the valley, but here, the ground being a nature not happy in its revealing of tracks, we were forced to know which was direction to continue, and at that the bosun was set up a loud shout to Job. Perchance he might be yet alive, but there came no answer to us, save for a low and uncomfortable echo, and the bosun, desiring to waste no more time, ran straight down towards the center of the valley, and we followed, and kept our eyes very open about us. We had gotten perhaps halfway, then one of the men shouted that he saw something ahead, and the bosun had seen it earlier, for he was running straight down upon it, and holding his torch and swinging his great cutlass, and instead of smiting, he fell upon his knees beside it, and the following instant we were up with him, and in that moment it seemed to me that I saw a number of white shapes melt swiftly into the shadows further ahead, but I had not thought for those when I perceived that which might be the bosun knelt, for it was the stark body of Job, and no inch of it was covered with little ring marks, and I discovered my throat from every place there ran a trickle of blood, so that it was most horrid and fearsome sight. At the sight of Job so mangled and bebled, there came over a sudden quiet of mortal terror, and that in the space of silence the bosun placed his hand over the poor lad's heart. But there was no movement, though the body was still warm. Immediately upon that he rose to his feet with a look of vast wrath in his great face. He plucked up his torch from the ground, which he had plunged into the haft. He stared around in silence of the valley, but there was no living thing in sight. Nothing save the great fungi and the strange shadows cast by our great torches in the loneliness. At this moment, one of the men's torches, having burnt near out, fell all to pieces, so that he held nothing but the charred support, and immediately two more came to a like end. Upon this we became afraid that they would not last us back to the camp, but we looked at the bosun to know his wish. For the man was silent, and peering everywhere into the shadows, then forth the torch fell to the ground in a shower of embers. And I turned to look. In the same instant there came the great flare of light behind me, accompanied by the dull void of dry matter suddenly alit. I glanced back to the bosun. He was staring upon one of the great toadstools, which was in a flame all along its nearer edge. In the burning which, in incredible fury, sent out the spirits of flame, and anon giving out sharpness reports. And as each report, the fine powder was belched into the sea streams, which, getting into our throats and nostrils, set us sneezing and coughing most lamentably. So I'm convinced, had any enemy came upon us at the moment, we have been undone by the reason of our uncouth helplessness. Now whether it come to the bosom to set light the first of the fungi I do not know not, for it may be that as torch coming to a chance against it set it afire. However chance the bosom took in a variable hint from the providence, and he was already setting his torch to one a little further off, whilst the rest of us were near to choking with our coughings and sneezings. Yet we were so suddenly overcome by the potency of the powder, I doubt in a full minute passed before we were each one bruised in the matter of the bosun, and those whose torches burnt out, knocking flaming pieces of the fungus, of the burning fungus, and then with these impaled them upon their torch sticks, and did so much excursion as any. And thus it happened within 5 minutes of the discovery of Job's body. The whole of that hideous valley set up into the heaven the reek of its burning. Whilst we filled the murderous desires, I ran hither and thither with our weapons, seeking to destroy the vile creatures that had brought the poor lad to such an unholy death. Dust we made back to the body of the boy, to the shore. All during that night no man of us slept, and the burning of the fungi set up a mighty pillar of flame out of the valley, as of the mouth of a monstrous pit, in which the morning came it still burned. Then when it was daylight, some of us slept, being greatly awearied, but some kept watch. And when we waked, there was a great wind and rain upon the island. Chapter 10. Light in the Weed. Now the wind was very violent from sea, and threatened to blow down our tent, which we indeed achieved. At last we made an end of the cheerless breakfast. Yet the bosun made us not trouble to put it up again, but spread it out with the edges raised upon props made from the reeds, so we might catch some of the rainwater. For it became imperative that we should know our supply before putting out to sea again. And while some of us were busied about this, he took the others and set a small tent made of square canvas. Under this he sheltered all of our matters, like to be harmed by the rain. In a little, the rain continuing very violent, we had near a beaker full of water collected in the canvas, and were about to run it off into one of the beakers when the bosun cried out to hold, and first taste of water before we mixed it what we had already. At that we put in our hands and scooped some of the water and taste, thus discovered it to be brackish and quite undrinkable. At which I was amazed until the bosun reminded me of the canvas that saturated for so many days in the salt water, so we would take a great quantity of fresh before the salt was washed out. Then he told us to lay it flat upon the beach and scour it well on both sides with sand, which we did, and afterwards let the rain rinse it well, whereupon the next water that we had caught we found to be near fresh, though not sufficiently for our purposes. Yet when we had rinsed it once more, it became clear of the salt, so that we were able to keep all that we caught further. And then, sometime before noon, the rain ceased to fall, though coming again at our short squalls. Yet the wind died not. but blew steadily continued from that quarter during the remainder of the time that we were upon the land. Upon the cleansing of the rain, the bosun called us all together and we might take a decent burial of the unfortunate lad, whose remains had lain during the night upon one of the bottom boats of the discussion. It was decided to bury him in the beach, for it was the only part there was soft enough earth that was in the valley, and none of us had a stomach for that place. Moreover, the sand was soft and easy to dig, and as we had no proper tools, this was a great consideration. Presently, using the bottom boards of the oars and the hatchet we placed, had a place large and deep enough to hold the boy, and when we placed him in, we made no prayer over him, but stood about the grave for a little space, in silence. Then the bosun signed us to fill with sand, and therewith we covered up the poor lad, left him to his sleep. And presently we made our dinner, after which the bosun served out to each one of us very sound pot of the rum, for he minded to bring us back again to a cheerful state of mind. After we sat a while, smoking, the bosun divided us into two parties to make search through the island among the rocks. Perchance we should find water collected from the rain, among the hollows of the crevices, for though no means caught sufficient for our needs, he was especially anxious for the haste, and the sun had come out again, for he feared that such small ponds as we could find would speedily, bidding to keep all their weapons very handy, and the other is further a greater one. And in each party we carried an empty breaker, for slung from a couple of the stout reeds, so that we might put all such driblets as we could find straight away into it, before they had time to vanish into the hot air, and the purpose of boiling the water. We had brought with us tin pannikins, when the other, the boat's bailers. In a while, after that much scrambling amid the rocks, we came upon a little pool of water that was remarkably sweet and fresh, and from this we moved nearly 3 gallons before it became dry, and after that came across maybe 5 or 6 others, but not one of them near so big as the first. Yet we were not displeased, for we had near 3 parts filled the beach. We made back to the camp, having some wonder as to the luck of the other party. When we came to the camp, we found the others returned before us, seeming in very high content with themselves. Come upon a great basin of fresh water, and a deep hollow, third of the distance up the side of the far hill. And thus the bosun bade us to put down our breaker, and make all of us to the hill, so he might examine for himself whether the news was so good as it seemed. Presently, being guided by the other party, we passed around the back of a far hill and discovered to go upward toward the top at an easy slope, which many ledges and broken places, so that there was scarce more difficult a stair to climb. And so, having climbed perhaps 90 or 100 feet, we came upon suddenly the place which held the water, and found that they had not made too much of the discovery, for the pool was nearly 20 feet long and 12 broad, and so clear that it had come from a fountain. Of how good the supply of water was for our needs, seemed very much relieved, and his mind declared that within 3 days, at most, we might leave the island, at which we felt none of us any regret. And about the boat escaped on, we might have been able to leave the same day, but this could not be done before we had her seaworthy again. Having waited until the bosun had made complete his examination, we turned to descend, thinking that this would be the bosun's intention, but he called to us to stay, and looking back, we saw that he made to finished the descent of the hill. At that we hastened to follow him, though he had no notion of his reason for going higher. Two parts of it presently we had come to the top and found a very spacious place, nicely level, save that in one or two parts it crossed by deepish cracks, maybe a foot and a half wide, and perhaps 3 to 6 fathoms long. But apart from the great boulders, it was, as I had mentioned, a spacious place. Moreover, it was bone dry and pleasantly firm under one's feet, that was so long upon the sand. I think even thus early, I had some notion to the bosun's design, for I went to the edge and overlooked the valley and peered down, finding it near a sheer precipice. Found myself nodding my head as though we were in accordance with some a person looking about me, and discovered the bosun to be surveying all that which looked towards the weed, and I made across to join him. Here again, I saw that the hill fled away very sheer, and after we had went across the seaward edge, and there it was near abrupt as the other weed side. Then having, by this time, thought little upon the matter, I put it straight to the bosun that he would make indeed, a very secure camping place, with nothing to come up on our sides or backs and up front, whereas the slug could be watched with ease. And this I put to him with great warmth, for I was mortally in dread of the coming night. Now, when I made an end of speaking, the bosun disclosed to me that this was, as I suspicion, his intent, and immediately called upon the men that we should haste down and ship our camp to the top of the hill. At that the men expressed their appropriation, and which haste every one of us to the camp, and began straightway to move our gear to the hilltop. In the meanwhile, the bosun, asking me to assist him, set again upon the boat, being intent to get this batten nicely shaped and fit to the side of the keel, so it would be bed well to the keel, and more particularly to the plank which had sprung outward from its place. And this being labored the greater part of that afternoon, using a little hatchet to shape the wood, which he did with surprising skill. Yet evening was come, and had not brought it to his liking. But it must not be thought that he did not work at the boat, for he had men to direct, and once he had made his way to the top of the hill to fix place for the tent, and after the tent was up, he said to carry dry weed to the new camp. And at this he kept them until near dusk, for he had vowed never again to be without sufficiency of fuel. But 2 of the men set to collect shellfish, putting 2 of them to the task, because he would not have one alone upon the island, not knowing but what then might be danger, even though it were a bright day. And most happily, really, it proved, for a little past the middle of the afternoon we heard them shouting at the other end of the valley, not knowing what they were in need of assistance, but ran with all haste to discover the reason of the calling, passing along the right hand of the side of the blackened and sodden vale. Upon reaching the verge of each, we saw a most incredible sight, for 2 men were running towards us through the thick masses of the weed, while no more than 4 or 5 fathoms behind pursued an enormous crab. Now I thought the crab we had tried to capture before they were coming to the island, a prodigy unsurpassed. But this creature was more than treble its size, seeming as though as prodigious evil a chase of them, and moreover, in spite of its monstrous bulk, it made way better over the weed than I should have conceived to be possible, running almost sideways, and one enormous claw raised nearly a dozen feet into the air. Now, whether omitting accidents, the men would have come good of their escape to the firmer ground of the valley. There they could have obtained a greater speed. I do not know, But suddenly one of them tripped over a loop of the weed, and the instant laid helpless upon his face. And he had been dead the following moment, for not for the pluck of his companion, and faced round manfully upon the monster, and it ran with his 20-foot spear. It seemed to me the spear took about a foot below the overhanging armor of the great back shell. I could see that it penetrated some distance into the creature, the man having, by the aid of Providence, stricken at an invulnerable part. Upon receiving his thrust, the mighty crab ceased its pursuit and clipped the haft of the spear with its great mandible, snapping the weapon more easily than it had done the same thing to a straw. By the time we had raced up to the men, the one who had stumbled again was upon his feet, and turning to assist his comrade, but the bosun snatched his spear from him and leapt forward himself, for the crab was making now at the other men. Now the bosun did not attempt to thrust the spear into the monster, but instead he made 2 swift blows at the great protruding eyes, and in the moment the creature had curled itself up, helpless save for the huge claw waved about aimlessly, and that the bosun drew us off, though the man who had attacked the crab desired to make an end of it, averring we could get some very good eating out of it. But this the bosun would not listen, telling him that it was yet very capable of deadly mischief, and did any but come within the reach of his prodigious mandible, and after near to place the 4 beakers which we had not thought needful to carry to the new camp on account of their weight under the upturned boat, some holding up the gunwale, whilst others pushed them under. Then the bosun laid the unfinished batter along with them, and we lowered the boat again over all, trusting its weight to prevent any creatures from meddling with aught. After that we made once to the camp, but wearifully tired, and with a hearty anticipation of supper. Upon reaching the hilltop, the men who had bosun had sent with the lines came to show them a very fine one and cleaned it. Now, as I said, it was not unlike a great kingfish, and like it had a mouth full of very formidable teeth, the use of which did of nothing but the coiled tentacles of a squid or cuttlefish, with which I have shown the weed continent swarmed. Then there were ups set upon the bark. I was confounded to perceive the length of thicknesses of some of them. This I can only perceive that the particular fish must have been very desperate enemy to them, and able to successfully attack monsters of bulk infinitely greater than its own. After this, whilst the supper was preparing, the bosun called to some of the men to put a piece of the spare canvas upon a couple of the reeds so as to make a screen against the wind, which out there was so fresh that it came at times near to scattering the fire abroad. This they found not difficult, for a little on the windward side of the fire ran one of the cracks of which I made previous mention, and into this they jammed the supports in so very little time had the fire screamed. Presently the supper was ready, and I found the fish to be fair eating, though somewhat coarse, but this was no great, so empty a stomach as I contained. And here I would remark that it made our fishing save our provisions through all our stay on the island. Then, after we'd come to an end of our eating, we lay down to a most comfortable smoke, for we had no fear of attack at that height, and with the precipice upon all sides that lay in front. Yet so soon as we rested and smoked a while, the bosun set the watchers, for he would run no risk through carelessness. By this time the night had drawn on space, yet it was not so dark but that one could perceive matters at a very reasonable distance. Presently, being in a mood tended to thoughtfulness, and a feeling of desire among for a while little, I strolled away from the fire to the leeward edge of the hilltop. Here I placed up and down a while, smoking and meditating. Anon, I would stare across the immensity of the vast continent of weed, and slime that stretched incredibly desolation beyond the darkening horizon. And there, would come to the thought to the terror of the men whose vessels had been entangled among the growths. And so many thoughts came to the lone derelict out there in the dusk, and I fell to wondering what the end of her people, and that I grew yet more solemn in heart. For it seemed to me that they must have died at their last by starvation, and if not by that, then by the act of some of those devil creatures which inhabited the lonely weed world. And if not by that, then by the act of someone of the devil creatures which inhabited the lonely. And then, even though I fell upon this thought, the bosun clapped me on the shoulder and told me that in a very hearty way to come to light of the fire and banish all melancholy thoughts, for he had a very penetrating discernment and had followed me quietly from the camping place, having a reason once or twice before to chide me for gloomy meditations, and for this many others matters had grown to like of the man, which I could almost believe at times. He was regarding of me, and his words were too few for me to gather his feelings, though I hoped that they were as I surmised. And so I came back to the fire presently, it not being my time to watch till after midnight. I turned into the tent for a spell of sleep, having first arranged a comfortable spread of some of those softer portions of the dry weed to make a bed. Now I was very full of sleep, so that I slept heavily, and thus wise heard not of the man on the watch until the bosun, yet the rousing of others waked me. And so I came to myself and found the tent empty, in which I very hurriedly to the doorway discovered that there was a clear moon in the sky, by which the reason the cloudiness had prevailed, and we've been without for the past 2 nights. Moreover, the sultriness had gone, the wind having blown it away with the clouds. Yet though maybe I appreciated this, but it was in a half-conscious manner, for I was put about to discover whereabouts of the men, and the reason of their leaving the tent. With this purpose I stepped down from the entrance and followed the Indians and discovered them all in a clump beside the leeward edge at the hilltop. At that I held my tongue, for I knew not what silence might be their desire, but I ran hastily over to them, and inquired of the bosun what the manner of the thing which called them from their sleep. And he, for an answer, pointed out into the greatness of the weed continent. And at that I stared over the breadth of the weed, showing very ghostly in the moonlight, but for the moment I saw not the thing which purposed to draw my attention. Then suddenly it fell within the circle of my gaze, a little light in the lonesomeness. For the space of the moments I stared with bewilderment eyes, and then it came to with the abruptness that the light shone with the lone derelict lying out in the weed, the same that upon very evening I looked with sorrow and awe, because of the end of those who had been in her. And now, behold the light burning, seeming within one of her after cabins, though the moon was scarce and powerful enough to enable the outline of the hulk to be seen clear with the rounding wilderness. And for this time, until the day, we had no more sleep, but made up the fires and sat around it, full of excitement and wonder. And getting up continually, discovered the light still burned. This it ceased to do about an hour after I'd first seen it, but it was more the proof that some of our kind were no more than half a mile from our camp. And at last, day came. Thank you very much for joining. I shall be back in a little bit. Who knows, most likely tonight, because I slept all day like a fool. But anyway, rest well.